Hey, it's Johnny Miller from Point Blank Online Music School, back once more to give you another little tutorial in Ableton Live 8. I've been listening to loads of tracks recently by a guy called John Talabot, who I think is an amazing producer. He always manages to get a very human feel into his tracks, uplifting and organic. And I'm creating a little track idea at the moment, a little mid-tempo thing for the summer, 115 BPM. And I wanted to get this human organic feel into my tune. Inspired by the likes of John Talabot. Now, Ableton Live have got a great instrument that you can get from their website at the moment called the Skidoo Stones. And it's basically a sampled instrument, similar to a xylophone called a lithophone. And it's made out of rocks, individual rocks that have been shaped and crafted to provide a tone when you hit them with a mallet or a stick or something. And they've basically taken these stones into the studio and sampled them all up to create a really, really diverse instrument of instrument rack presets. So I've used that in this track, and I've used it to create a multi-layered instrument that provides an arpeggio, textures, and a main melody. And all side by side with a nice uplifting piano riff by way of an audio clip. So in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to layer up various similar sounds into an instrument rack that all bring something different to the table and can just give that extra organic human feel to your tracks. Here I am in session view getting my track started, and I've got some drums, a piano loop, and an analog device that I'm using at the moment. The drums, if I open up the group track, we've just got some 606 drum samples if I hit play. So that's from the 606 drum machine. And I've got a drum loop, which I've layered with the 606 samples. That's just providing a nice little groove, little Latin, bit of a Latin feel, and also some congas. Getting quite another short loop. Just layered those three up to create my drum track. Now the piano loop, simple riff, 2-bar riff. It's got a nice kind of uplifting summer feel to it. Quite a laid-back track overall so far in terms of vibe. Only 115 BPM. Now the analog device, I've used this to recreate essentially the main melody from that piano riff. Now, although the piano riff is a chord, all I've done is I've sat and listened to it and I've worked out roughly what the melody is actually doing in single notes. So I've not actually reprogrammed a full chord. I've got that already. I've got the piano which is playing the chords. All I wanted was the main riff in single notes, which just stacks up with the piano nicely. Now I'm going to use this analog later on for some bass, and I'm going to use this MIDI clip now to layer up some Skidoo Stones patches inside an instrument rack to create a multi-layered melody texture that's just going to sit alongside my piano, mirroring what the piano is doing. But again, not a chord, just single notes. So I'm going to set up arpeggios, different layers, some sidechain compression as well to get some movement and energy in there. So in a moment, I'm going to load up these Skidoo Stones and start layering things up. I've loaded up the first of these Skidoo Stones patches that I'm going to use today. I've loaded up the rubber mallet preset patch just from one of the 3 regular Skidoo Stones patches. We've also got a folder of effects driven patches as well, and I'll use those later on. But for now, I've just gone for the rubber mallet, and what I'm going to do, I'm just going to hit the little devices icon here on the instrument rack and open up and have a look at what I've actually got in this preset. And we've got an arpeggiator, we've got velocity, we've got the multi-sample simpler device that contains all the samples, again 8 octaves of multi-sampled Skidoo Stones samples here. It's amazing. We've got different velocities over 8 octaves, all individual sounds. And lastly, we've got the compressor in this preset as well. Now, I'm just going to make a few subtle changes. Let me just close those two down. I'm going to make a couple of subtle changes on the arpeggiator. And if I just take my analog MIDI clip which I created earlier on. I used analog really just as a reference, really, just so I could hear the tone really clearly. So I'm just going to pick that clip up and drag it over onto the rubber mallets track. And let's just play that. Now, at the moment, it doesn't sound too crazy because it's just playing single notes. I'm going to use the arpeggiator now. I'm going to switch the arpeggiator on. Now, this arpeggiator is mapped onto the jammer macro control on this instrument rack. This is a nice thing about racks. We can have multiple devices inside a chain in an instrument rack and map individual parameters to one of the 8 macro controls. So over here we've got a selection of different controls from all the devices inside the rack. We've got the jammer controlling arpeggiator. We've got the envelope shape of Simpler on the attack and decay. We've got the filter from Simpler on the filter type and cutoff and reso or resonance. And then we've got the compressor threshold set up here on this last macro control. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to turn the jammer value up. This is going to just work the arpeggiator's rate value. So I get a nice arpeggiated pattern. Now, because I'm just using single notes, that's a little bit boring. I need to get more range over the keyboard. So I'm going to bring up the steps value to 2. So now my arpeggio is working over 2 octaves. I'm also just going to bring the decay in a little bit. It's going to tighten things up. And the compressor threshold. And that's just going to give me a little bit more pump, a little bit more volume. Alright, cool. I can close down these devices now. I don't need to see them. And what I'm going to do now is right-click and group. And this is going to put that rubber mallet device into another instrument rack. If I open up the chain list, I've now got my rubber mallet device inside an instrument rack. So it's an instrument rack inside another instrument rack. Now, this main instrument rack that I'm using here, I'm just going to rename it Stones Layers. There we go. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is start stacking up other Skidoo Stones patches inside this rack. And this single MIDI clip will just drive them all. Next one I'm going to add is the one of the ones from the SFX folder. So if I open that up, we've just got a range of Skidoo Stones patches here, just with different effects. I'm going to go for the rubber mallet delay effects. Just load that in. It's going to take a second to load. There we go. All right, now this one, if we have a look at it, we've got the rubber mallet patch. We've got the arpeggiator again, but I'm not going to use that. We've got obviously a delay device, which is why it's called the delay effects, and a compressor. So again, if I close those down, I don't really need to even see those. I'm not going to do anything to this device at all. Let me just hit solo and press play. So now I've got a version of the Skidoo Stones which is just playing single notes. And I can layer that, if I take the solo off, with the first layer, the rubber mallet with the arpeggio on it. Let's layer up another one. I'm going to take the Stones Scrapes Membranes. And this is really cool. It's one of the patches where you're just kind of scraping the stones to create this strange pad-like texture. Again, I'm just going to leave that the way it is. So that's my kind of texture that sits underneath. Got my arpeggio texture on top and in the middle. The rubber mallet playing single notes. Now I'm just going to work the levels of each chain a little bit to essentially mix these 3 layers now. I'm going to turn the arpeggio down a bit. That's the first layer. I'm going to turn the scrapes layer down a bit as well. That's the texture that's going to sit at the back. Okay, cool. So they're my 3 layers. Now I'm going to add some sidechain compression in here too. So I'm going to take a compressor and I'm going to drag that down onto the Stone Scrapes track and just set up a sidechain to the kick, kind of regular stuff. 606 drums, and then in the audio from input track, I'm going to set up the kick. Now it's actually a little bit easier to do this if I had the drums playing, because now I can see exactly on the left of of the list here which tracks are playing and which signal is going to activate my sidechain, instead of having to recognize and read the names of all the different sounds in my drum rack. It's just nice and easy. So I go straight to it. There's my kick. Let's just solo that so we can hear it. So my kick's ducking the level of the scrapes layer now. And for any sidechain compression to the kick, this is standard stuff, but it's well worth knowing in Ableton. Feed forward model 1, and look ahead 10 milliseconds. And then just bring the attack and release in or out, depending on how slow you want the sidechain ducking effect to release. A longer release slightly. There we go. Alright, now what I'm going to do is right click and copy. And I'm going to paste that exact same compressor onto the first layer. Right click, paste. And I'm just going to bring the release in a little bit so it's a little bit snappier. So now we've got sidechain compression on the first and third layer, but not the middle layer. That's my single notes with the delay on. Okay, so there's my layered stones instrument rack. Let's put the piano on as well. And of course this is all going to complement the piano. So I'm just going to bring the stones down a little bit in level. Now on the piano, I've just added a little bit of EQ just to roll off the lows, because I'm going to use that analog device that I started with. I'm going to use that in a moment to create a bass line. I've just added as well a little simple delay onto the piano just so it sounds a little bit sweeter. Okay, now anytime during the production of the track, I could just use the on-off buttons here. If I open up the instrument rack chain list here inside session view, essentially mixer tracks, I've got the on-off buttons for each chain. So anytime I can hear any one of those chains on their own. And that's going to give me variation over time. Just means that we're not hearing all three at the same time together for the whole way through the track, the whole duration of the track. So that's really useful. That's going to come in useful when I arrange this, because I'll be able to work those speaker ons and speaker offs just in the automation here. Just be able to draw in on-off values to switch the different layers on and off over time. Okay, let's go back to session view and just use this analog device now. And again, I'm going to take the MIDI clip that I started with and just copy it just by holding Alt. Just drag that back onto analog, and let's have a listen to analog now. Now this is what I just used earlier on for reference to copy the piano melody. So I'm going to use that same device and same clip again. I'm going to take the analog shape. This is just the default analog, by the way. It's not any one of the presets. Just drag the analog in from the browser. I'm going to change the shape to sine wave, and then just bring it down a couple of octaves. And I've got a nice sine bass here. Let's just give that a bit of level. Turn it up on the track. So it's a nice deep bass. And of course I've got my sidechain compressor just ready to paste. So that's going to give me a nice little ducking effect and give me a nice bit of a broken feel on that bass part. Okay, let's put everything together now. Cool, so I've got my multi-layered stones element inside an instrument rack. I've got a bass line, and both those tracks are essentially mirroring what the piano is doing. We've got the chord coming from the piano and single notes coming from analog on the bass, and these Skador stones inside this instrument rack, multi-layered instrument. Okay, cool. You can learn loads of cool stuff like this at pointblankonline.net, and there's loads of free content on our YouTube page and on the school's website and on the school's blog. So check those out, and I'll be back again soon to show you some more little tips with Ableton Live 8. Okay, peace.